When you're looking at the strategic team or the gold team at the top of a company, who are usually your execs, very unlikely to have a lot of cyber knowledge, very unlikely to necessarily know the intricacies of how the estate works. So you have to really lay out what decisions you want them to make, how you want them to triage things, what you want them to consider in a really simple way, because they're under pressure at that moment in time. And it's exactly the same thing in the boardroom. If you've got a ton of tasks that you have to do simultaneously under pressure, you will do them all really poorly. You'll miss things out. If you have options, you don't have to panic. The moment you have to panic is when you run out of options. If you had data that was potentially life-ruining and that was stolen, exfiltrated, and held to ransom, do you have a fiduciary duty to pay that ransom and stop or prevent the data being released? I honestly think that for a lot of companies, in reality, if there was no way out of the situation, I think they'll pay the ransom. I think potentially it's a business cost that most people would think was worth paying. This has been uplifting. I'm really glad I came. Welcome to Grab the Mic with Lisa and Eleanor.
Executed perfectly.
I know. I have a role.
You've just given me a disclaimer that you're going to be neither lovely nor fun for this podcast.
It's a disclaimer that comes with all public and friendship engagements.
Okay. At least I know where I stand. So
Yeah.
I'm not going to expect too much.
Exactly. Low expectations are always good.
Set the bar low. Lisa Forte. Some people call you Lisa Forte, which is incorrect.
Which is not my name.
Yes. Exactly.
But people then tell me that I've spelt my name incorrectly. So
Well, of course they should know.
yeah, totally. It's great fun.
Why would you know how to say your own name? You are the owner and the co-founder of Red Goat Cybersecurity Consultancy, ex-police, counter-terror unit and cybercrime unit. And then you studied law, never used it.
No, sorry, Mum and Dad.
So that's well spent money. Didn't you do a master's as well?
Yeah. Quite a lot of money has been spent.
Just to cement the waste of money. But actually, the one job that you did that always sticks in my mind was something to do with pirates and boats. Just tell me briefly what that was about.
It was protecting ships from pirates. I personally wasn't responsible for protecting the ship from the pirates. But the company that I worked for, you had sort of the plans of the ship and you'd work out kind of where you'd fortify the ship to stop the pirates getting on board, or if they did get on board, kind of slow their advance to the bridge and sort of where they would take control of the ship. And then we put armed guards on board the ships to protect them. And this was at a time when piracy was like a massive issue. And it was very similar to ransomware in that respect, because they'd take control of the ship, hold it to ransom, get paid for it. So it was basically the same business model replicated.
And you were on the security like operations side?
Yeah, very much not on the boat.
Okay. And was that before or after police?
Before.
Okay, so that was your segue in.
That was my segue into security, to my parents' horror. Because I'd studied law and I was all set to be this sort of highbrow lawyer in the city, and then went the other way.
I've never asked you in all of our interviews why you did not go into law.
I don't know really. I think it just didn't really fit what I wanted. So I started to look into it as a career from a corporate law perspective, didn't really enjoy that side of things. Did my master's in sort of international law side of things, so mainly focusing on like law of armed conflict, international humanitarian law, things like that. Really enjoyed that. But there just wasn't really a clear path at that time into something. And something came up that sounded a lot more interesting.
Pirates.
And I decided to take that. But I think that's the sort of lesson that I think really ought to come across to younger people looking to get into anything, really. I'm working sort of alongside the NCSC at the moment to sort of promote their Cyber First Girls program. And again, one of the key messages they're trying to push out is actually, if you're not techie, if you haven't really considered that sort of career, you can switch and change all over the place. I mean, most people I know of my age aren't doing what they studied at university.
That's true. And of the probably thousands, actually, not even hundreds of people I've interviewed in cybersecurity, very few have ever planned to come into it. Like the most common answer is, I'm here by accident, or I'm here by mistake. So I think that is the commonality, isn't it, between everyone?
Yeah, just take the opportunities as they come your way and see where it leads.
Yeah, do you regret that?
Some days.
Yes.
Some days I do, some days I don't.
I want to talk to you about that, actually, the founding a business and that aspect of what you do. But first, I'm going to do our quick fire questions. Oh, no. I've made all of yours travel themed because most people that know you or follow you will know that your passion is travel and climbing and doing all kinds of adventurous and ludicrous things.
Ill-advised.
Ill-advised is the perfect phrase for it. So the first one, if you were on a train going somewhere for a big adventure and you're going to be on that train for 12 hours, what 3 snacks would you take with you?
Oh, one of them's really easy, discos.
Oh my God, that's my favourite crisp. Salt and vinegar.
Salt and vinegar discos.
They're my favourite crisps.
I know, favourite crisps. Oh. Quite a rare find in the UK now.
They are.
You have to hunt around a little bit, but there are some spots. So definitely discos. I'm allergic to chocolate, but I would bring some chocolate. And then, so the third snack would then have to be Piriton.
We actually discussed this yesterday.
I'm not sure if you can count antihistamine as a snack.
No.
An accompaniment.
I might give you that one for free, actually.
I get the Piriton for free.
You get the Piriton for free.
So I get 4 snacks.
Yeah.
If you're counting.
I don't think we can call them a snack. Maybe you could choose a drink then.
Okay, well, it'd have to be coffee because then I've got sugar, salt, and caffeine, so all of the main nutrient groups.
Excellent. What is your dream travel trip that you've not yet been on? I know you've already been on some, but what's still left?
Oh, there's so much left. Kyrgyzstan, definitely want to go to Kyrgyzstan. Yeah, that's a conversation stopper.
Never even heard of it.
Mm-hmm. Really want to go there. Lots of places in Africa I haven't been that I really want to go to as well. And then probably go and spend a couple of years in South America when I retire, would be my goal.
Okay. What would Kyrgyzstan bring you? What would you expect from travelling there?
Climbing.
Okay. Mountainous.
Yeah, I think it's one of the, if not the most mountainous countries in the world. So that sold it to you, obviously, because I know you love mountains.
My relationship with mountains is take a photo and send it to you and say, you'd love to climb here.
Why don't you climb this?
Yeah, that's as far as I go. Okay, if you could become an ambassador for one country and they would send you the gifts that are synonymous with that country, which would you choose?
Probably South Korea.
Okay.
I would say.
And what would you want them to send you?
All of the food that
all
they
of it.
have, just all of it, just keep it coming. There wouldn't be a limit to that.
Okay, nice. And last one, how many languages do you speak?
Fluently, pretty much 0. I can dabble.
Not even counting English?
I mean, there would be people who questioned whether you count English. I speak a bit of Russian, a bit of Italian, a bit of Japanese, but nothing.
Only a bit of Italian?
Yeah, I can understand more than I can speak.
Okay.
But my grandma would turn in her grave knowing that I still haven't properly learned Italian.
Because you are half Italian.
Yes.
Okay.
So I put on weight fast, I can't queue, and I'm really, really impatient when I'm hungry. But
all of the good things that come with being Italian.
Traits. I'm a real catch.
You're really selling yourself.
I know I am. It's a skill.
Okay, so let's start with the founding side of what you do. Obviously, I'm quite interested in this, given that 2 years ago co-founded Assured. Give me the good, the bad, the ugly of building your own business from scratch.
Yeah, I think I've had this conversation with quite a few people recently, and honestly, I think there's a lot of people out there who have now got to a stage. I mean, Red Goat's almost 8 years old. Who've got to a stage where there is that stability. And when they get to that stage, they go out and they talk to people and they say, oh, it's the best thing I ever did and it's wonderful and I can do this, I've got all this freedom, etc., etc. The reality of it is, it's the 2 most hideous years of your entire life when you start it. There's a reason, I don't remember what the percentage is in the UK now, but some hideously large percentage of companies fail within 3 years because it's really, really hard. And it doesn't matter how great of an idea you have or how amazing you are at your job or how talented, knowledgeable, it doesn't matter. There's an element of luck and sleepless nights and worry like you've never had before in your life. And honestly, I absolutely love what I do now. I'm really grateful for where we are. If someone said to me, would you like to start over and do it again? I would say no.
Really?
Because those 2 years were insanely hard, for sure.
There's a high correlation, isn't there, between entrepreneurship and burnout?
Yes.
And I had this conversation with Nick Whitfield, actually, at the SASIG Leaders Conference last week. And I was interviewing him on stage about burnout, and he was talking about the effects of that, of building a business and how lonely it can be at the top and how you don't really have anyone to talk to because you're too scared that it's going to be seen as a sign of weakness by your board or by your senior leadership team, and they're going to lose faith in you. Did you find it quite a lonely experience?
Yeah, because I think also I didn't really have anybody else who was on that journey. So everybody else I had, all my other friends, they weren't entrepreneurs. So you can't really have the conversation with them because they don't know. They don't understand what it's like. And it is really lonely. It's still quite lonely. To be honest, most of the stuff you do is by yourself, or certainly speaking from myself, it is. A lot of the travel you do is by yourself. And so you end up spending an awful lot of time by yourself. You've also got a ton of responsibility because you've got to make the right decisions for the business, for the people who work for you, for the clients that you have. And that goes above and beyond just being good at the job that you're delivering. So, yeah, it's really hard because I, didn't really appreciate that you have to become an accountant, HR, sales, marketing, all of the different roles you have to somehow fill. Certainly at the beginning you do. And I am not very good at sales and marketing, in case that hasn't become apparent in this conversation.
I don't know. I think you're very good at marketing yourself.
I don't know.
You are a good
possibly.
marketer. Yeah, no, you absolutely are. What's been the hardest part of that journey? You said the first 2 years. Was there anything sort of specific that happened in those first 2 years where you thought, you were at the peak of just being done?
It's just, concern about money, concern about income, making also the sort of pressure that you put on yourself, because I think you go in with really unrealistic expectations of what you can do. And I'm very good at beating myself up. Like, it's one of my probably biggest drawbacks, I think, that I set absolutely stupid goals, obviously don't achieve them, and then beat myself up about them. And that's in my personal life as well as in everything else.
And it's interesting you saying about how you have to spend quite a lot of time on your own. And it could be knowing you as I do, you actually love being on your own. So for you to say that, I can't imagine what it's like for people that don't particularly enjoy their own company. It must feel really lonely.
Yeah, definitely. I quite like that. So when I'm like, I'm feeling a bit lonely, it's like, God, I haven't actually spoken to anyone for like 7 days.
Which is a lovely feeling for you.
Yeah, it is sometimes.
Yeah. We touched on marketing there, and actually that's another thing. I think you have built your personal brand so well. And I wanted to ask you, like, what's your advice for people that are maybe not necessarily launching their own company in cybersecurity, but trying to break into the industry in some way or another as a practitioner, on the vendor side, whatever it is they're doing? How do you go about creating a personal brand?
I wish I could say there was this great strategy that I'd employed and that paid off. But honestly, I had no plan. Absolutely none at all. I think the piece of advice that worked for me, and maybe this doesn't work for everybody, is that my assumption going into it was if I post something and people engage with it, I'll always engage with them back in exchange for their comment. And that came really more from the perspective of, if you've taken time to comment something, I felt bad ignoring the comment. Obviously that doesn't always work on Twitter for reasons I think we're all aware of. But that would probably be my one tip. And then just, try and steer clear of things that are devoid of personality, because you are who you are, and that personality should come through in everything you do, really. I think that's problematic if you end up having no hobbies, no interests. You actually don't have an awful lot to write about. But everyone's got life experience that I think resonates with people. So just post that and be ready for some nice comments and some really horrible ones.
Have a thick skin.
Yeah.
When you post the sort of content around your climbing or hiking or travel, do you get as good a response and reaction than you do if you're talking purely cyber?
I don't know. It depends. I think you probably, in both situations, I think the criticism stings more.
Yeah.
If it's personal. If I write something about cyber and someone disagrees with me, even in a really kind of blunt or even offensive way, it doesn't really get to me. But when it's about something I'm doing personally, it stings quite a lot more.
Yeah.
So I'd say that's the biggest difference between the two things, that you have to just be a bit prepared for when the criticism comes your way or the really strange comment, it's going to stick in your mind.
You're more vulnerable when you're opening yourself up on a personal level as opposed to just a work level, aren't you? So
definitely.
And then it is going to sting.
Yeah.
You have such a volatile relationship with social media, though. Sometimes when I see you and we speak, you're like, I'm considering throwing the towel and just completely coming off. Sometimes it's working really well for you. It's a constant roller coaster. Where are you with it at the moment?
At the moment, I'm sort of lukewarm, I would say. It's weird. And actually, I find it platform by platform, sometimes they just do my head in. Like, sometimes I'm really enjoying Instagram and sometimes I'm like, I cannot see another woman in a thong pretending she's hiking. I'm off this platform. Thank you, Instagram. I really wanted to see that. So yeah, I think it's sort of goes up and down with platforms as well. I'm finding Twitter a little bit difficult at the moment because it's become politically not aligned to my thinking. Let's just leave it at that. And I find that quite laborious. So I've been morning blocking with my coffee.
Have you?
Yes.
Like a daily routine?
Yeah, I think I'm on like 390 accounts at the moment.
Wow.
So, yeah.
It's a hard place to be. It's not a nice place to be anymore. I've stopped using it. I've used it very, very sparingly. And I just find myself feeling really frustrated when I do go on and scroll through. It's so polarized as well.
Yeah.
It feels like sometimes it feels like no one's actually talking any sense. It's all just people saying things for the sake of saying them to get a reaction. And yeah, it's a tough.
I disabled all notifications on my phone.
That's a good idea.
And yeah, someone said it on Twitter at some point, and I disabled it across all of the, obviously not email, but everything else. And that's much better because then I choose when I check WhatsApp or whatever, it doesn't tell me when to check it, which I find less stressful actually.
Yeah. You do put a lot of yourself out there, but what would you like people to know about you that you don't think they do? Or what do you think is the most misunderstood thing about you, which is probably a better way of phrasing it?
That I'm super outgoing and, I don't know, extroverted.
Yeah.
I'm probably not anywhere near that at all. A lot of people actually meet me in person and think I'm being rude because I'm not the same personality. But I think that's true of a lot of our industry, actually. I think a lot of people find it much easier to communicate online than in person. And I quite want to run away half the time.
Are you an introvert?
Oh, for sure, yeah. I would quite happily sit at a dinner table and not say anything the entire evening.
Just absorb.
And just not have to talk.
Yeah. I remember you saying to me once that you find events quite draining and tiring because it takes a lot out of you to go and interact and talk and socialise.
Yeah, I'm doing far less speaking engagements now, and I think I'm feeling much happier for that. Doing much more stuff, client work and stuff through my company, which I find easier for my personality. I think what I've realised is that everyone has the sort of image that they put out to the world, which isn't necessarily Eleanor behind closed doors, right? But the closer Eleanor, public Eleanor, and Eleanor at home are, the less conflict exists within you and the easier it is to exist. And if they're miles apart, that actually becomes quite draining to sustain.
Yeah, because you're literally switching on and switching off parts of your personality, or adapting parts of your personality that maybe that aren't authentic, I suppose.
Yeah, no, totally. So I think that's one of the big lessons I've learned in the last couple of years.
Is there a correlation, though? I totally get the scaling back on the speaking engagements. Is there a correlation between business acquisition? You do have your own company, so you do have to source and acquire business, and speaking engagements. So if you do less of the latter, does it mean that you get less of the former?
I've actually seen the opposite. And I don't think, I think actually they're not correlated at all. I think the presumption, and I very much fell into this trap as well, of thinking that being hugely present on social media, being at all the speaking gigs, having this huge public presence was going to equal success in your business. And it doesn't actually. That's not to say that having no brand would definitely make it harder. But I do think that actually it doesn't do quite what you think. It's likes on Twitter aren't going to equate to more business.
No. I think that's a misconception, because I think a lot of people believe they do.
Yeah, and they aren't. They don't equal money, and they don't equal more business. And they don't equal respect either. And those are lessons that I've had to learn the hard way, because I definitely, at the beginning of my career, I was the same. I bought into that. I thought that was how it worked.
Yeah. And your client work, I always think of it as a lot of instant response planning, crisis management. Is that the core of what you do, or are there other things I'm missing?
Yeah, pretty much the core of what we do. We do some training as well, and sort of webinars and things like that. But yeah, the main bulk of what we do involves sort of crisis management, consultancy, and everything around that.
Okay, so crisis management. What are the main mistakes that you see organisations making when it comes to that?
It comes back basically to human beings under pressure are absolutely terrible decision makers. And that applies to all of us. And the only way you start to get around that is through experience, training, having things in place that allow you to sort of bypass things. The example I always give is I'm an absolutely atrocious cook. Probably, arguably, one of the worst people to have in a kitchen.
You're a terrible Italian, by the way.
I'm an awful Italian.
Can't speak Italian, can't cook.
Hate olives. I like red wine, if that's redeeming.
That is a redeeming quality, yes.
So I always say it's like, for me in the kitchen, if I have a recipe that's a long sheet of paper, paragraphs of text, it's going to go wrong really badly.
Right.
And I'm not going to be able to follow it. And as soon as I start getting under pressure, things are going to start burning. I'm not going to be able to follow the instructions. If you lay that out for me in a checklist of then do this, then add this, then do this, I can follow that even under pressure. And that's basically what this equates to in crisis management. So when you're looking at the strategic team or the gold team at the top of a company, who are usually your execs, very unlikely to have a lot of cyber knowledge, very unlikely to necessarily know the intricacies of how the estate works. So you have to really lay out what decisions you want them to make, how you want them to triage things, what you want them to consider in a really simple way, because they're under pressure at that moment in time. Mm-hmm. They're not sitting there reading a beautiful prose that you've written in a crisis management plan.
So you need the recipe, to use the cooking analogy. They need to have a recipe, but that recipe needs to be short and concise.
Yes. And I think they then just need practice. They need practice running through that recipe to understand what their roles are, understand what questions they can ask. Because again, like I said, you all make terrible decisions in a crisis.
Yeah.
Every human being does. You sort of stop processing things at a logical level, and it all goes very wrong very quickly.
How can you alleviate that psychological element, though, which is when you, however much planning you've done, when you're in that, so take ransomware, for example, you can create your disaster recovery or response plan for ransomware, but actually in that situation where you have been faced with the ransom note, you don't obviously know what that's going to be in advance. It's very much a real-time situation. How can you stop yourself from entering panic mode?
It's difficult, but it's practice. And you see that in climbing, caving, diving. Same thing applies. A lot of the things, especially in diving, there's a lot of literature written on it. Because, for example, and this sort of takes it out of cyber temporarily, but it is relevant, I assure you. Diving, they have a whole section in Paddy's courses about something they call task loading, which is where you have multiple tasks that have to happen simultaneously. The pressure is mounting. Obviously, you're underwater, which adds an obvious fear of drowning, which I'm sure everyone can appreciate. And what tends to happen is you start making mistakes. And you forget to check something, you forget to look at your pressure gauge or whatever, and things start to mount and go wrong very, very quickly. And it's exactly the same thing in the boardroom. If you've got a ton of tasks that you have to do simultaneously under pressure, you will do them all really poorly. You'll miss things out. So again, it's about working out the priority. What do I want to do first, second, third? Keeping calm, working out. So I actually interviewed Tim Peake, the astronaut, as part of an event that happened up in Manchester.
Which for you is, I was going to say peak, excuse the pun, but that is peak celeb interaction, isn't it?
That was a terrible, terrible joke.
It's not a joke, it's genuine. That is your peak idea of like
Please
perfection.
stop saying peak.
Peak without a K, without an E.
Yes. And he was saying, I was asking him this question of, when you're outside of ISS doing a spacewalk or whatever, something that's hugely dangerous, like dangers like you and I can't even quantify.
Yeah.
How do you keep calm when something goes wrong? Because the moment something goes wrong, you feel your adrenaline spike, right? And he said that his training was all about, if you have options, you don't have to panic. The moment you have to panic is when you run out of options. And I thought that was just so perfect from a cyber perspective. If I've got options, I just work through my options. What's the best one? I'll try that. That didn't work. Okay, try that. When I no longer have options, then panic is probably your best option left. So,
and I think in the cyber world, there will always be options.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's always options that you can take. And I think I talked about this yesterday about the kill switch option, the sort of drastic containment, big red button of cut the company off from the internet completely sort of thing. That's an option. That stops, that contains the threat there and then. Obviously it has other consequences, but that's ultimately an option, as a last resort option as well. So I think you're right, they always have options, but it's just about communicating that to them and leaving people who aren't in cyber feeling empowered that they can actually handle this, because there's no point going in and just terrifying them and leaving them feeling, you want to have left them with this sense of sort of self-efficacy in what they're about to go and do or what they might have to do.
And do you do the response work as well, or do you just do the preparation and the education and the...
So we largely do the preparation and stuff. We also have a capability, so if people want us to sit in if there was an attack, to sort of be an external third party in that situation, we can do that as well. But largely it's preparation.
And how much does emotion come into it? So you've got the panic in that situation, but quite often I think being the victim of an attack can be quite an emotive issue. Does that change how people and humans behave in those situations as well? Yeah,
I think so. And I think it's quite an interesting question actually, because the issue of sort of victimization from cybercrime is quite difficult to quantify. And actually when you read some of the literature on it, it's actually difficult to identify all the victims. So if you have a company, for example, who are the victims in that situation? I mean, technically every employee who might end up redundant, or all of the sort of knock-on consequences. But there's actually very little research that's actually been done on the effects of that on people. And I think one of the examples, and I forget what the company name was, which was probably for the best, the person who, I think they clicked on a phishing link or they'd done something that had initiated the attack, was actually identified. Their identity was actually revealed on Twitter, LinkedIn, etc., I
remember this.
Yeah. And I couldn't help but think, I wonder the effect of that on that person. Because
the blame and the shame.
Oh yeah, 100%. Because what does that do? I mean, I would imagine, and again, I have no data for this, but I would have thought this would be sort of permanent psychological impact from something like that.
I totally agree. And actually, so Miguel Clark is a mutual friend of ours, actually. He was on the podcast recently. He spoke about that. He spoke about how he would like in his work to try and stop people feeling like victims of cybercrime and stop acting like victims and become more combative. I mean, it's a very FBI way of looking at it. But he said if we could achieve that and we can stop people feeling like victims, then actually we're going to be in a much stronger position or have a much stronger posture as an industry than we do now.
Yeah. And I think the other issue with it is that there's such a breadth of what could happen from cybercrime, right? You could, at one level, you're talking ransomware or DDoS or corporate related stuff. At the other end, you're talking like cyber-enabled crime, like romance fraud or just scams that materialize. And I think the impact of a lot of this isn't necessarily always communicated. I struggle with it with my friends who are not cyber. And I sort of, without them wishing me to do this, I'm obviously always imparting upon them updates and things they should be doing. I'm a super fun friend. And their go-to criticism almost is, well, I don't have much money. What are they going to do to me? Mm-hmm. And it's frustrating because I think actually there's a lot of things a lot of psychological impact that can happen that you're not necessarily realizing. Taking this kind of out of cyber crime for a second, the only way I can relate to it is with like deep fake stuff. So I've had a lot of videos made of me and a lot of photos generated of me. And I posted something on Twitter recently asking the community what their attitude to this was. Without consent, someone's taken video of you from, say, this podcast, made a video that's perhaps well-meaning, it's, supposedly funny, but how does that make you feel? Because it made me feel very uncomfortable. Even though it was done in sort of seemingly good faith, like it was done as a joke, it wasn't sexual, it wasn't, defamatory or anything like that. It felt horrible.
100%. You feel vulnerable and just totally out of your comfort zone, I'm sure. Yeah,
100%. And you look at this image and you just think, you haven't mentioned to me you're going to do this. You've taken photos of me, fed it into whatever platform you've used, created this image, then tagged me in it on Twitter. And the whole process just made me feel horrible, which is, I wouldn't have necessarily clicked that would be the response. So they
tagged you in it. Is it almost like, as oh, look, we're really proud. I bet you like this work that we've done.
Yeah.
That's bonkers.
It's bonkers. And I think, actually, if you read through the thread on Twitter, there were lots of stories of other people who were talking about where this sort of line ought to sit. And I think almost with cybercrime, it's like that. You don't necessarily realise how you're going to feel until it's happened.
Yes.
Because I wouldn't have predicted I'd have this response.
No, I totally get that. But I think one of the elements of it is it opens your mind and makes you realise that what could happen.
Yeah.
So even though it wasn't defamatory, it wasn't sexual, my mind would immediately go to, well, it's not this time. But if they're doing that and they've got the ability to do that and it's that easy, then next time it could be. Yeah. So it opens your imagination, doesn't it, to the what if. Yeah. And the what's next.
Yeah, totally. And you sort of think, well, this time, it was relatively harmless stuff. But to somebody else, or, someone takes a joke too far. Yeah. And all of a sudden, you've got something a bit nastier on your hands.
I think that's my biggest fear when it comes to AI is the very, maybe even already happening, the inability to determine what's real and what's not, I think is such a threat to democracy, to society generally. It petrifies me.
And it works in reverse as well, because it now gives deniability for something that is real.
Correct.
So again, it leaves you questioning the truth of things in either direction.
That's absolutely true. And you see that with the presidential debate.
I'm going to claim this is a deep fake. This interview goes badly. I'm going to claim this. I was never here.
What can I do to change that? But you do think that, right? With political candidates, for example, it's the biggest election year ever this year. But there's been so much deep fake content created around Kamala Harris, Biden, Trump. Mm-hmm. If real footage was now to emerge of, say, for example, Trump and the grabbing or anything like that, he would very, very easily, and his team would very easily be able to pass that off as a deepfake.
100%. There was a big think tank, actually, before the UK election that was trying to get the UK political parties to agree that any AI generated content would be marked as such before they posted it, which they didn't actually get to that point, but they were sort of saying you have to identify anything that's from sort of a Gen AI output, which is also quite interesting, isn't it? To think, you know.
I'm just thinking, why did Keir Starmer not come out recently and say that the sausages comment was a deep fake? Why didn't he do that? It would have been the obvious defense, wouldn't it?
It was so bad.
So bad, but yet so good.
The memes, I must congratulate actually society, because one thing that we do unite on is the ability to generate memes so fast after something happened. It's quite incredible.
It is. It's the speed at which it's done. I have so much respect.
I know, and they're fantastic.
They are fantastic. They just keep going, don't they? Yes. So maybe Starmer should have done that.
Yeah.
Plausible deniability. I did not say sausages.
Yeah.
I said hostages.
That.
Totally lost my train of thought now. I'm just thinking about that. But I think the case that comes to mind when you talk about victimisation of cybercrime and the impact it's had and psychological impact it has obviously got to be Ashley Madison. Has reared its head again recently with I think it was Netflix documentary. But when you were saying about who is the victim, with that, it was two-pronged. So I guess Ashley Madison as company are the victim of that breach and the ransom. But actually, surely there's three sets. There's also the victims of the people that had their data stolen and their lives upturned. And then you've got the families or the partners of those people. That's so many victims and so many lives destroyed, actually, by a cybercrime. It's not taken seriously enough.
No, I agree.
As real world crime.
Yeah, I agree. And I was, again, I guess I was kind of complicit in that in some respects, in the sense that I saw the Ashley Madison breach, obviously, as we all did when it happened, at a purely sort of cyber incident response level, quite cold perspective on it. And then I watched the documentary on Netflix, and I hadn't really clocked, as you said, the sort of trickle-down effect of that breach in terms of people's lives being disrupted. And you're right. I think that's, you know, in some respects, I'm as guilty as anybody else in that respect. I didn't really think about it.
And I think it was the first time, I remember reporting this at the time at Info Security Magazine, it was the first time a cyber attack knowingly resulted in a suicide.
Yeah.
One of the victims did take their own life as a result of it. And I think that was a real wake-up call, possibly, that everything was...
It takes you down a really difficult moral argument, actually. Because if you had data that was potentially life-ruining, which could even be things like health data, and that was stolen, exfiltrated, and held to ransom, do you have a fiduciary duty to pay that ransom and stop or prevent the data being released? And anyone who thinks... There's a great quote, and I can't remember for the life of me who said it, so I really apologise, that if you think an issue is black and white, you've misunderstood the issue. And I think this comes down to this. It's anyone who falls 100% in either category doesn't understand how complicated this issue actually is. Because if you say, well, you know, you take the hard line of you should never pay the ransom, there's aspects to that which I agree with. The net effect of that, though, is the potential destruction of people's lives.
Yeah.
If you then say pay the ransom, you protect that particular group of people, but obviously, ultimately, if you look long term, you're enabling the continuation of this crime. So therefore, there's almost damned if you do, damned if you don't in either direction. And so it's really, really complicated, and something that is, I think, is just a hideous issue to try and have to unpick what's right in that situation, because I can't really come down on either side.
The moral complexity that you've just presented on a play, it really is unfathomable, actually, to be in that position. But I do think that if you are holding, as a company, sensitive information, HIV charity, for example, I think there's been a very similar case to that, you do have a moral obligation to protect.
Yeah. And people talk about, well, you should do this. Well, that's great, but you've already been ransomed, so that's irrelevant now.
Yeah.
Yes, you can go and implement lots of stuff post-incident, fine, but ultimately they've got your data. At that moment in time, everything else is rather irrelevant. Am I going to say don't pay the ransom? I don't want to pay the ransom, but am I going to say that those individuals can have that data leaked and their lives ruined, and that's okay? That's a really horrible decision to make.
Yeah. What do you think the conversion is of senior leadership teams that have a disaster recovery plan or a crisis management plan, and in that plan they say what their decision is going to be if they are ever to get ransomed? What's the correlation between that and then what they actually do in a real world situation? Do most companies stick to their guns, or do you see quite a lot of flipping?
There's a lot of different statistics on who pays ransoms. I think the worst one I've seen is like 89% pay. Again, I think the visibility that we actually have into who is getting ransomed and if and when they pay is pretty poor and pretty low. So it's very difficult to draw any conclusions on that. I honestly think that for a lot of companies, in reality, if there was no way out of the situation, I think they'll pay the ransom. And I think the reason they'll do that is that actually the net effect of it from a PR perspective hasn't actually proved to be terrible. When we look at casinos and other people have paid a bit of a blowback for a couple of days and then it's done. If your business kind of gets back online and that data isn't dropped, I know some people say that's very big ifs, but ultimately that's what you're basing it off of at that time. I think potentially it's a business cost that most people would think was worth paying. And the thing is, this isn't by mistake.
Yeah.
The ransomware groups have designed it in this way so that it does work. If you paid and they dumped the data the next day, well, it would be a no-brainer. No one would pay the ransom. So I think, again, like coming back to that quote, if you think it's black and white, you've misunderstood the issue.
I was going to say, that quote is perfect in that situation, isn't it? It really is. There is that shade of grey, and when you hear the arguments that sit in the black or white camp, it's just not
reality.
It's not reality.
It's not reality at all. And businesses have done this a lot. Large companies have been putting money aside for fines and for fraud cases and other stuff. It's they sort of see it as that kind of category of risk, I think.
Yeah, I agree. So when we think about Assured, the clients that we insure, one of the pieces of advice we always give is like a really straightforward, silly thing that people don't think of, is if you are ransomed or you can't access your networks due to a cyber attack, if the number for your cyber insurance company or your broker is saved on your system, how are you going to access that? How are you going to know where your documents are? So one of the simplest pieces of advice we always give clients is store that number and have those documents printed offline, have it on a magnet on a fridge or something. What similar sort of tip or simple thing that clients don't necessarily think about for crisis management would you give to the
have out-of-band communication set up and ready to go? So have something that's not connected to your network, that you're not running, that's not email, that you have set up.
Not Teams, not email,
not Teams, nothing
Slack.
that's something completely different for two reasons. One, if worst case scenario, absolutely everything's down, or you've had to pull the network down, you've lost that communication channel. The second reason is there is evidence that attackers have sat on networks and read communications that have been going back and forth between teams. And I mean that as Teams, not Teams, the platform.
Yes.
For disclosure. So again, out-of-band communication, often forgotten. I did a post about it recently on LinkedIn. People use WhatsApp. The security community go, oh, you shouldn't use WhatsApp because insert all of the reasons we're very familiar with. The reality, though, for me is I would rather someone used WhatsApp than nothing.
Yes.
It's better than nothing. Is it perfect? God, no. Should you be communicating COVID plans if you were a government across it? No, probably not. Probably not built for that.
Just a random example.
Just a random example I've come up with. It's not based on anything. But yeah, I think, have out-of-band communication. I think your point about having things offline is great as well. An airline I worked with recently. So airlines are really amazing in some capacities because they're really well versed on disasters and how you prepare for it. And they will have entire buildings just dedicated for if there's a plane crash, what do you do? having things like credit cards at airports around the world so that people can access money quickly instead of trying to transfer it, etc., etc. And they have lists per country of the airports and who's at their airport and what you need to do and where the hotel is where you take the families and all this stuff. Mm-hmm. And it's fabulous from that perspective. And that's basically where we need to get to with a lot of other companies.
Mm-hmm. When you work, this is a really random question, but I'm just thinking, when you work in crisis preparation management, does that have an effect on you in that you walk through life always seeing what could happen? Like, I'm thinking about like a real life hazard awareness test when you do your driving test. Are you constantly thinking this could happen, this could go wrong, what if? Like, does it give you a negative or cynical outlook?
I think so, yeah. I think it's inevitable. And I think that's true of security as well. I think it makes you paranoid and not a whole lot of fun to be around.
You did use that as a disclaimer at the beginning.
I think it definitely does. And I think I see that in my climbing, my caving, diving, things like that. Don't take stupid risks. Mm-hmm. Someone said to me once, a climber said to me, don't die in a stupid way, which I think is like the best. If you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. So he was talking about it in the context of people choosing not to wear a helmet.
Okay.
Why not? You've got a helmet. It's in your rucksack. Put it on your head. Well,
yes.
Don't die in a stupid way when the helmet's in your rucksack. And it's very similar in sort of crisis management in businesses as well. You've got the ability to do this now. Don't make your life harder for yourself. If and when it happens, when you could just write the comms template now.
Get the obvious things right.
Get the obvious things right that you can plan now.
And when you talk about the comms, like did you say out of bands? Comms, and you said that WhatsApp is better than nothing.
Yes.
What's better than WhatsApp?
Well, I think it depends on the business. It depends on what you're communicating through. I mean, there are lots of other platforms you can use. Some people create their own out-of-band platforms. Signal. I'm not sure I would advocate for Telegram. For reasons. But people, one company wanted to use Facebook Messenger, which was a tough one to agree to. But ultimately, I think...
Facebook Messenger?
Yeah.
Goodness me.
I know. I didn't even know it was a thing.
No.
I think the thing with WhatsApp is the penetration WhatsApp has across the globe is huge. So actually what you'll find is boards probably have it on their phone. They know how to use it. They know how to be in the group. Is it ideal? No. 100% I'm not going to say this is an ideal way to have these conversations. But if that's the buy-in you can get initially from them, then go for it. Use that. And then next year, try and upgrade it to something better.
Yeah. I think that's a good
Be a bit realistic.
Yeah.
It's maybe not the fight you want to have. You've only got so many fights.
Pick your battles. Before we move into the final 3 questions, you asked a question on LinkedIn of your followers recently, and I'm going to ask you the same question. I
don't do it so that people can ask me.
I know, that's why I'm asking you. You asked what's the biggest myth about cybersecurity.
Yes.
And had loads of responses and interaction. What do you think the biggest myth is?
I think the biggest myth is that we're all techies. And we're all this nerdy, weird. I mean, we are weird.
And
that's
nerdy,
probably true. But actually, like, saying you work in cybersecurity is a bit like saying you work in science. There's so many jobs in cybersecurity at so many levels. And I think we're proliferating, and we're part of the problem. We complain about the problem, but we're also part of the problem. We like the sort of hacker memes and the sort of jokes, and you are sort of pushing that narrative a little bit. But I do think it's a problem for getting girls into cybersecurity because you're making it unattractive.
I agree. There's a real rhetoric, isn't there? It's the same colours, it's the same words, it's the same use of imagery that plagues the industry. And I think as a consequence, we have a real marketing problem as an industry.
We do. And it was interesting because someone said to me that at this school, they were trying to get girls into cybersecurity, and they said, they all want to go into law. And I thought, that's really strange. Why do they want to go into law? Turns out one of the reasons was that they follow a couple of these women who are young lawyers who live in the city, on Instagram.
Okay.
And these women are like, this is a day in the life of a city lawyer. And here I am with my nice handbag going to the shop and having my nice brunch or whatever. And the lifestyle sold. And ultimately, I think if I reflect back to when I was young, did I have this like real deep seated moral purpose that I wanted? Or did I just want some money and to buy a horse? I probably wanted that.
Did you buy a horse?
No. I failed. I've just come full circle and realised my whole life has been nothing. Thanks
you also told me how self-critical you are, and now I've pointed out that you failed in your objective.
Yeah, my one objective as a child. You haven't achieved it, Lisa. This has been uplifting. I'm really glad I came. But yeah, I think, are you selling it to them in a way that they understand? Or are we posting on LinkedIn, which they're not even on, about how they need to get into the industry?
Yeah, that's so true. It needs to be made more aspirational.
It does.
And I did a panel very similar on this topic yesterday, and it was about how you can't be what you can't see.
Yeah.
And if young girls can't see girls that look like them, but in the future, in powerful roles, making good money, buying their horse or not, a very nice car instead, then they're not going to want to aspire to be in that industry. And I actually had a girl on the panel. Her tag is STEM Babe, and she's got a huge, enormous following on TikTok.
Awesome.
She's young, and it's all about how cybersecurity. She works for one of the big five, big four, big five, big four. Oh, who could be the fifth?
Just create someone.
Yeah, and just audition someone to add in.
Promote them.
She works for the Big Four. She's got a really good role, but actually she's really dedicating herself to making it TikTok friendly and building that content. Maybe that's what we do need.
I think, yeah, because they're not on LinkedIn.
No, that's so true.
They're on Twitter and Instagram and things that I probably haven't even heard of because I'm too old.
And do you know what? That's actually a really good point for recruitment as well. When we're looking at the fact we've got a talent gap, a skills gap, we want a certain type of extraordinary. Everybody's fighting for that certain type of extraordinary. Maybe we're doing it in the wrong places.
Yeah, I think so. I think we're definitely missing something because the problem is getting worse, not better.
Yeah.
So we're obviously, it's a bit like with cyber awareness training and things like that. I always argue, if the data is showing that it's not improving, then you need to change the strategy because it's not working. It's as simple as that.
But I don't want a TikTok account.
I'm going to make you one now because you've just destroyed all my hopes and dreams by telling me I didn't have a horse.
You're going to deep fake me.
Just wait.
TikTok account.
Exactly.
Oh, God. Last question before the final section. So I did lie a minute ago. What's in the future for you? Because do you see yourself in consultancy, running your own business forever? Or do you have an unfulfilled ambition that you want to
I've got to buy a horse
apart from
now.
the horse?
Got to go home and buy a horse.
Go home and Google horses.
It's a difficult question. I honestly don't see myself not doing what I'm doing. And some people have sort of said, oh, would you retire early? Would you do it? I think I would be the worst person to do nothing. I really couldn't do it. I love what I do. And yeah, I'm quite happy to continue on doing that. And then traveling, I'm very fortunate in the sense that all my in-person work tends to stop December, January, and then again in the summer for 2 months. So I get to work remotely from any corner of the planet, which is fantastic. So for me, I'm living life as it is now. I'm not thinking too much about where Lisa will be in 10 years because I've sort of learned that actually you're better off living in the moment than worrying too much about 10 years from now.
And do you do that by design? You halt the in-person work so that you can travel?
No,
or do you travel because it halts?
Yeah, exactly the latter. Yeah, it tends to be a largely sort of September, October, November, and then the sort of spring are the sort of peak seasons, and then the sort of Christmas and summer season tend to be sort of largely just remote stuff. So I take advantage of that, and I don't have kids, so
where's
why
your next
not?
trip? What's the winter trip this year?
I think I'm just going to go to Oman.
Obviously.
Because I last Christmas I did a lot. I went to Mongolia and China, which was a big amount of stuff. And then obviously I went to Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan is not for beginners. I'll just leave it there.
Just still ambitious for most of us, but
I'm
less
probably going to go
ambitious for
diving
you.
with sharks. Yeah.
Yes. Without a cage.
Yeah, definitely without a cage.
Don't die doing stupid things, remember?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Need that on a
I think
t-shirt.
we've already forgotten that. Okay, last 3 questions. What's your unpopular opinion? Choose one.
My unpopular opinion actually relates to security, and I think a lot of the problems we have, certainly with crisis management, are our fault. And the reason for that is, I think we have typically, and when I see this a lot when I speak to boards, we have oversold things we've bought to them to get the funding. So we've said, you know what, we've got this amazing backup facility, we've got this, we've got that. They think now there's this immediate backup, you press the button and it's all good. Well, in a crisis, your decision making is fundamentally different if you think you have that capability. If you don't think you have that magical button, your decision making is going to be different again. So you've ended up shooting yourself in the foot a lot of the time. So I think for me, the unpopular opinion is, don't oversell what we can actually do in reality, because it doesn't serve you in a crisis.
And that, again, is something I think we're guilty of doing across the industry. If you look at many of the vendor solutions out there, they always overpromise and more than often than not underdeliver.
Yeah. I had someone come up to me after a talk once saying that they had a tool that solved all of the issues I identified in my talk. And I was like, you just don't.
No.
Because otherwise, we wouldn't have this problem.
No.
Like, if your tool stops ransomware, we wouldn't have ransomware.
Correct.
It's that simple.
Yeah. I know, but it does feel like, why are we not grasping that in terms of
Oh, yeah,
from
exactly.
a marketing aspect?
It hasn't got better, it's got worse.
It has, yeah.
So that's my unpopular opinion.
Okay, I agree with it.
Cool. We can both be trolled then.
Yeah. What's a song, a quote, a lyric that you like to live your life by?
So this is a really good quote from one of my favorite YouTube channels, which you won't have ever seen. It's called Dive Talk, and they're these 2 guys.
Oh, I know Dive Talk.
Honestly, that would make my day. Can we just rewind and just pretend?
Absolutely not.
We should have rehearsed this bit. It would have been epic. 2 guys in America who are divers, whatever, they do reaction videos to diving accidents. Really pleasant. I like to do it to relax. Anyway.
I bet you love true crime drama as well.
I do love
you?
true crime drama.
Yes.
I get very frustrated when they do something stupid and get identified as the murderer. So anyway, they're reviewing this thing, and these 2 guys had gone cave diving. They were experienced cave divers. They'd gone into the cave, and unfortunately they'd had an accident and they'd both died. Obviously very tragic. But when they're reviewing it, one of the guys talks about it, and he says, these guys were very experienced, but they were only very experienced at never having a problem. And I thought that is just so perfect for absolutely everything. You can be so experienced in something, but if you've never had to deal with an issue, you're not experienced in handling the problem.
You can only be experienced in what you've handled. You can't be experienced in the unknown.
You've got experience in everything going right.
That's a good quote. It's quite a dark quote, but it is a good quote.
I mean, you expected something dark.
Third question, you can't pick anything dark.
It's probably going to be dark.
So we play out the episode with a song of your choice. And the song we ask you to choose, it's not like what you want at your funeral or anything like that, but it has to be something that uplifts you or that you play when you've had a big win, a victory song.
So this is definitely a shout out to Rick Ferguson, who sends me playlists and songs that I can... that I need for certain things. He's brilliant. If you want any music recommendations, he's your man.
Yeah.
He sent me a song, and I forget who it's by, but it's called Fuck the Haters. And it's the most amazing song for just when you're having one of those moments. I guess some people would call it like imposter syndrome or feeling a bit down or feeling a little bit overwhelmed. It's an amazing song for just thinking, actually, yes.
Love it. Who's that by?
Don't know.
So strong in your convictions then.
I can picture the album cover, but
We'll
I
have to
can't
text
picture who
him.
it is. But yeah.
Okay. Fuck the haters.
Fuck the haters.
I mean, that could have been your quote to live your life by.
Yeah, but I don't live that, do I really? So it would be a bit kind of disingenuous.
That's actually true. I'm not going to go there. Thank you so much. You have been both lovely and fun. So I feel like it was a false disclaimer.
Redo it.
Failed.
I failed.
Just like the horse.
All right. Jeez, what a brutal ending.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
I'm Eleanor Dallaway, and you've been listening to a Grab the Mic production. Join us next time for more unmissable cyber stories.